In a quiet town, not far from the city center, where the scent of roasted maize and groundnut fills the air, lived a young man named Mark and his wife, Elizabeth. They were what people called a perfect match. Both sang in the church choir, their voices rising together like morning birds greeting the dawn. When they stood side by side before the congregation, people smiled. They were the picture of harmony. Mark was a civil servant, neat shirts, polished shoes, calm eyes. He worked at the Ministry of Finance, where everything about him seemed orderly and sure. Elizabeth was a home economics teacher at the local secondary school. Her students loved her, not just because she taught them how to bake bread or sew neatly, but because she spoke with gentleness, with the kind of patience that makes a young girl believe in herself. Their wedding had been one the town still remembered: music, dancing, and prayers for a fruitful home. The old women sang blessings that day. May your house be filled with laughter. May your courtyard never be silent. Everyone expected children to follow soon. And at first, Mark and Elizabeth expected the same. At first, there was peace. They enjoyed each other, evening walks after dinner, laughter over small jokes, hymns sung before bed. Elizabeth filled their little house with warmth, curtains she sewed herself, flower pots she painted, the smell of jollof rice and fried plantain drifting through the window on weekends. Every month, she marked the calendar, hoping for good news. And every month, her hope quietly slipped away again. By the third year, whispers began to travel. At church, some women stopped asking, "When will you have children?" Instead, they said, "We are praying for you." And in that small change of words, Elizabeth had pity. One afternoon, after choir rehearsal, a friend said, "Lizzie, don't just sit and wait. You know, my cousin took some herbs from a woman in the next village, and now she's pregnant with twins." Elizabeth smiled politely. "Thank you. I'll think about it." That night, she sat by the window, watching the moon, wondering if God still heard her prayers. Mark would often take her hand and say, "Don't worry, my love. God's time is the best." And for a while, that comforted her. Until even God's time began to feel far away. By their 4th year of marriage, the pressure grew. Relatives began visiting with advice wrapped in pity. Her mother brought bottles of herbs in old Fonte containers. Aunties spoke of traditional womb massages. Old friends brought powders, soaps, roots, and concoctions that smelled of bitter earth. "Try this," one said. "It worked for me." "Take that," another whispered. "This one clears the body." Elizabeth tried most of them, not because she believed, but because she hoped. She boiled herbs that stained her pots, drank bitter roots that burned her throat, lay still while old women pressed hot stones to her stomach and prayed in strange tongues. But there was one thing she would not do. She refused to visit a shrine. God is enough, she said firmly. If He will bless me, He will do it in His own way. Despite her pain, Elizabeth remained cheerful. She baked cakes for neighborhood children. She taught them how to sew and made sure they never left her house hungry. At family gatherings, she was the one who organized everything, cooking, decorating, making everyone laugh. People often said, Elizabeth has the heart of 10 mothers. And though her lips smiled, her heart quietly ached. At night, when the world was quiet, Elizabeth often prayed alone. Sometimes she wrote in a small notebook letters to the child she longed for. Dear baby, one entry read, I don't know your name yet, but I already love you. I pray for you every day. Maybe next month, you'll come. Mark didn't know about the letters. He didn't see the tears she wiped away before joining him at the dining table. Some nights, she dreamt of holding a baby, only to wake up with empty arms. Other nights, she would hum quietly, stroking her stomach as if comforting herself. The waiting became her silent companion. By the 10th year, hope had grown thin. That was when her niece, Sarah, came to live with them for her National Youth Service. Sarah was lively, full of energy, and loved her aunt deeply. But within weeks, she noticed the small bottles hidden behind the kitchen curtain, jars of herb soaking, labeled with unfamiliar names. She noticed the way her aunt sometimes winced when bending. One evening, Sarah spoke softly. Auntie, please, you've tried enough herbs. You and Uncle should go for proper medical tests. Elizabeth smiled faintly, stirring the soup. My daughter, this is my cross to carry. Don't worry about me. These roots are natural, no chemicals. God will make a way. Sarah sighed. She wanted to insist, but she saw the quiet sadness behind her aunt's calmness. So she said nothing. She helped her with chores, prayed with her, and loved her the best she could. A year later, Sarah finished her service and left for another city. As she hugged her aunt goodbye, she whispered, I will keep praying for you. Elizabeth smiled. Thank you, my child. 5 more years passed. On their 15th anniversary, Elizabeth fell sick. At first, it was nothing serious, just fever, weakness, a loss of appetite. But soon her skin turned pale, Her clothes hung loosely. Mark noticed she could barely stand during choir practice. He begged her to rest, but she smiled and said, "I'll be fine." They visited hospital after hospital, each giving a different answer. Some said kidney trouble. Others said liver infection. Medicines came and went, but her strength never returned. A friend from another city called and said, "Bring her here. Let our doctors see her." So they packed a few clothes and traveled with her younger sister. The journey was long. Elizabeth sat in silence, holding her Bible, watching the trees blur past. The next morning, the doctors ran tests. Hours later, one of them said gently, "Madam, there is a growth in your stomach. We will need to operate." The word growth sounded simple, harmless. They didn't yet know the weight it carried. 3 days later, she was taken into surgery. Mark sat in the waiting room, hands trembling, praying quietly. Hours passed. The clock ticked without mercy. When the doctor finally appeared, his face was grave. He said quietly, "We found multiple tumors. They have spread too far. We couldn't remove them." Mark's heart stopped. "So, what can be done?" The doctor lowered his voice. "Nothing. We stitched her back. It's too advanced." Mark stood there, stunned. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. When Elizabeth awoke, he took her hand and whispered, "The surgery went well, my love. We'll go home soon." She smiled faintly, whispering, "God is faithful." A week later, they returned home. Friends and church members visited, singing, praying, filling the house with faith. But Elizabeth grew weaker each day. She couldn't stand, couldn't eat. Her voice was soft like the wind. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky gold, she called Mark close. Her voice trembled. "Thank you for loving me." He held her hand, tears falling. "I wish I could do more," he whispered. 2 months later, she was gone. The whole street wept. Children cried. Women wailed. The church choir sang her favorite hymn, "It is well with my soul." She was buried under the mango tree she had planted years ago. The same tree that once shaded their laughter now watched over her grave. Mark sat there until night fell, unable to move. The house grew silent. No footsteps, no laughter. Just the ticking clock and the echo of her voice in his dreams. He stopped singing in church. He ate little. He sat for hours, staring at the mango tree. Friends came, trying to comfort him. The church elder said, "Brother Mark, life must go on." But life, for him, had stopped. For 2 years, he lived like a ghost. Then came Rebecca, a widow from the church. The elder suggested she could bring warmth back into his life. She had 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 6. The wedding was simple, quiet. For a while, the house came alive again. The children laughed. Rebecca cooked delicious meals. Mark smiled again. He drove the children to school each morning, waved as they ran off with their backpacks. People said, "He is healing." But healing is not always complete. Slowly, the cracks appeared. He started complaining that the children ate too much. He said they should not eat from the same pot as adults. He stopped them from watching TV, from laughing loudly. Rebecca pleaded, "They are only children." He snapped, "And they must learn respect." The joy drained out of the house. She spoke to the church elders. They tried to help, but nothing changed. After 1 year and 9 months, she packed her bags. "I cannot teach my children to accept cruelty," she said, and left. Months later, Mark's elder sister came to visit. "You cannot live like this," she said gently. "Our cousin's widow needs a husband. Help her raise her children." Tired and lonely, he agreed. The woman, Martha, moved in with her youngest child. She was patient, quiet, and content. She opened a small grocery shop near their house. She opens her shop in the morning and closes in the evening. Years passed. Still no child. But Martha didn't mind. She already had 4 from her first marriage. She cooked for him, prayed for him, and learned when to stay silent. One afternoon, Mark's nephew, John, arrived from abroad. He had studied medicine and was now doing his national service at a fertility clinic. He and his uncle shared a strong bond. John had been the little groom at Mark's first wedding. That evening, over dinner, John asked quietly, "Uncle, have you ever been tested?" Mark looked up, confused. "Tested for what?" John smiled. "For fertility. You've been married 3 times, yet no child has come." Mark chuckled bitterly. It was Elizabeth. Everyone knew she had the problem. John shook his head. "Sometimes life surprises us. Let's check, just to be sure." Mark refused at first. But after days of thought and quiet guilt, he agreed. The tests were done. 3 days later, John arrived with the results in a brown envelope. Mark opened it slowly. His eyes caught one word, exospermia. He frowned. What does this mean? John sighed. It means, uncle, that you cannot father a child. Silence filled the room. Mark's heart broke. The truth hit him, all those years, all that pain, and it had been his fault all along. He fell to his knees, crying, "Oh God, what have I done? She suffered because of me." His wife and nephew rushed to him, but he only wept louder. For days, he could not speak. He sat by the window each night, staring at the moon. He saw Elizabeth's face in the shadows. He remembered her laughter, her kindness, her pain. He began to visit her grave often, cleaning it, planting flowers, whispering, "My love, forgive me. I didn't know." His nephew gently introduced him to a church support group for men struggling with infertility. There, he listened, learned, and slowly began to speak again. Soon, he began helping others, using his story to teach. He worked with the fertility clinic, visiting churches and communities, telling men to get tested. He said, "Don't let your pride destroy your home. Find out the truth early." He started singing again, softly at first, then with strength. People heard the pain in his voice, but also peace. One Sunday morning, after choir rehearsal, Mark stood before the congregation. His voice trembled, but he spoke clearly. "My brothers and sisters, for many years, I lived in regret. But I have learned that guilt cannot bring back the past. If you love someone, carry the burden together, not alone. Silence can kill love faster than hate." The church fell silent. Then softly, the choir began to sing Elizabeth's favorite hymn. Mark closed his eyes and joined them. His voice rose, gentle, cracked, but free. After that Sunday, something changed in Mark. He no longer hid behind silence. He began to live, not perfectly, but honestly. Each morning, he woke before dawn, stood by the window, and whispered a short prayer. "Lord, thank you for another chance to do right." He started tending the small garden Elizabeth once loved. At first, the flowers refused to bloom. The soil was dry, the stems weak. But Mark watered them daily, speaking softly to them as if to her spirit. Within weeks, the garden came alive again, lilies, hibiscus, and the mango tree heavy with fruit. Children passing by would call out, "Uncle Mark, can we pluck one?" He would smile and say, "Just one," and say thank you. Their laughter filled the compound once more. The church, too, saw a change. Mark began to help couples in counseling. He didn't preach, he listened. When men complained about their wives, he would ask gently, "Have you asked her how she feels?" And when women cried about their husbands, he would say, "Sometimes pain speaks louder than words. Listen before you judge." People began to trust him. They called him Brother Mark the Wise. Once, a young couple came to him. They had been married for 3 years without a child. The husband spoke bitterly. "Everyone says it's her fault. I've tried to be patient." Mark looked at him for a long time before saying quietly, "My son, once upon a time, I said the same words. And I lost the best woman I ever knew. Please, go with her. Get tested together." The man hesitated, but later returned, humbled, tears in his eyes. "It was me," he said softly. Mark put a hand on his shoulder. "Now you know. That's the first step to healing." Years rolled by, quiet and steady like the rhythm of rain on an old roof. Martha, his third wife, remained faithful. Though they never had children together, she found peace in his gentleness. He had become different, slower to anger, quicker to smile. He often helped her at her grocery shop, counting coins, greeting customers, and telling stories to the little ones who came to buy sweets. On Sundays, he sat at the front of the church again, his Bible worn from use. He sang not with sorrow anymore, but with gratitude. People said his voice carried something healing, like a river flowing over old stones. Even those who didn't know his story could feel the weight and grace in his tone. Every year, on Elizabeth's Remembrance Day, he invited children from the neighborhood to the house. He cooked jollof rice and fried plantain, her favorite meal. He told them stories under the mango tree. Stories about kindness, patience, and truth. He never mentioned her name directly, but when he said, "There once was a woman whose heart was pure," the adults knew who he meant. At the end of the evening, he would whisper, "Love never dies. It just changes form." When Mark turned 60, the church held a Thanksgiving service in his honor. The hall was full, men and women whose marriages he had helped restore, children he had mentored, and young couples who saw him as a father. As he walked to the altar, slow but steady, the choir began to sing. It was Elizabeth's hymn, "It is well with my soul." Mark's voice trembled as he joined in. Tears filled many eyes that day, not from sadness, but from gratitude. After the service, he sat under the mango tree, surrounded by laughter and stories. One of the church children, a small girl with bright eyes, ran up to him. "Grandpa Mark," she said, "why do you always sit under this tree?" He smiled. "Because," he said softly, "someone I loved planted it. And when the wind blows through its leaves, I remember her." The girl nodded, thoughtful, and then leaned her head on his arm. The old man smiled again, his heart warm. As the years passed, his health began to fade, but his peace grew deeper. He spent most days on the veranda, watching sunsets, humming hymns, reading the same Bible verses he and Elizabeth once shared. Martha cared for him with quiet devotion. Sometimes she would find him asleep in his chair, a smile on his face, a small notebook on his lap, the one that once belonged to Elizabeth. Inside it were her old letters, now worn and faded. He had written a few lines of his own beneath hers. "My dear Elizabeth, I once carried guilt like a stone in my heart. But now I know love was never wasted. You gave me light, and I have shared it. Rest easy, my love. I am coming home soon." One cool evening, as the sky turned orange and the wind whispered through the mango leaves, Mark breathed his last. He went quietly, like a candle that had burned faithfully to the end. The town mourned, but not with despair. They said, "He lived well. He taught us love." The church buried him beside Elizabeth, under the same mango tree. On the tombstone, Martha engraved these words: "Together in faith. Together in love." Their story reminds us, truth is the heart of love. And from that day on, people who passed the tree often stopped to rest beneath its shade. Some came to pray. Some came to reflect. And some came just to sit quietly, listening to the wind in the leaves, as if it carried the soft echo of two voices singing still. And so, my people, this is how the story of Mark and Elizabeth ends, not in sorrow, but in peace. Their love became a lesson to all who heard it. That faith without truth breaks the heart. But truth, even when painful, can set the heart free. And though time may fade the sound of their song, the echo of their love still lingers. Like the whisper of a hymn carried on the evening breeze. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, share, like and comment.